What is going on, my fellow weebs? Krono here, and welcome back to the channel. So today, yeah, we're back to React content. It's about PSO2, so it's cool. A fellow creator by the name of Kathy has released a PS opinion video. They do these opinionated pieces where they talk about things that existed in the past, or how things are currently going and what you do to be better, so on and so forth. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to check out their opinion on a new video that they released, which is should sound classes return to NGS? Now, it's it's kind of one of those things that I would say, I mean, no disrespect to this. I feel like the normie crowd is like, yes, sound classes were the best. They should always be back. They were greatest, so on and so forth. And I'm not exactly in the same camp as far as sound classes existing. They were good, but I remember all the trouble that they caused for a long time. Hero quite literally breaking the entire balance of the game and causing them to take an entire episode of the game to rebalance every single other class in the game to actually come up to that point. Because they wouldn't nerf classes. I think the only classes ever really been nerfed was like Gunner. Um, and yeah, that Gunner got nerfed back in base PSO2, funny enough. But I digress. Moving on from that topic, they were bringing up basically every other class because of how good Hero felt to play and how it like highlighted how bad every other class was comparatively, or how bad they all felt to play comparatively, and why things couldn't be different. It's essentially caused a huge shift in the overall balance of the game. And then of course, Phantom, and then Etoile was kind of a little bit less. Etoile buffed other classes more than it was buff itself. And then of course Luster. Luster was Slayer before Slayer existed. And it was probably one of the most, I'm not going to say broken, I'm not going to say OP, but it was probably the most powerful class in base PSO2. And that was mostly because it was based on, or it was the main character's class. It was supposed to be like the class advocate for it. It's a whole other system we could talk about another day. But long story short, sound classes can be met with a bit divisive opinions sometimes. And since I'm in the camp of like, well, probably not, we should have a different type of system, I'd like to hear what someone else thinks about the topic itself. So figured I'd bring you guys along for the journey. This video came out a couple of days ago, so I gave some time for you guys, if you guys follow Kathy, to check it out on your own. And if you don't follow Kathy, you should definitely go subscribe to their channel. They're like 20 subs away from the big 1K, which is when you get to start monetizing stuff. I'm pretty sure they've hit the view count for that by now, so you guys should definitely go check them out 100%. So would be a big favor to me. And if you decide you want to watch this video yourself, there's a link in the video description. Just go watch it on that end. Like this video. Come back, let me know what you guys think. All right, let's pop over and check it out.
You know, I really am in a lucky position as a Tector main. When New Genesis came out, my favorite class was ready to go, and
Yeah, you were lucky. I had to wait months to get Bouncer.
arguably played way better than before. There are some elements that Tector is missing.
Arguably is right. There are those who really like Caster Tector, and they really miss it, to the point where I know a lot of people that play like Tector Force, even though they're just like a weaker Force, they miss the casting. They don't like the bonk, so.
That gave the class some flavor, but overall, I'm much happier with what I have than what I don't have. I know not everyone will agree, and that is perfectly fine.
Yeah, it's understandable.
However, not everyone was as lucky as I was. When I was finally hooked on PSO2, Episode 5 was about to begin, and I really liked Hero. So imagine if I wasn't Kathy, the dorky Tector girl writing an 80-page long guide about Tector, but instead Kathy, the dorky Hero girl. For 3 years I'd have a blast playing Hero, and then, when New Genesis launched, lose said playstyle.
Yep, completely gone.
Let's talk about the absence of Scion classes.
It's so, it's such a weird playstyle too, because sound classes basically shaped what current classes are today. And it's such a bit, it's weird, man. I know people that really love some of these sound classes, and they were addicted to their playstyles, and it's just, they're gone and they're not in the game right now. And I feel bad, but at the same time, man, like, I don't know. All right, let's just hear it. Let's hear about it. I'm gonna stop pausing. It's stop being a pause
But
stream,
first of
or
all,
pause the video.
what even are Scion classes? A lot of New Genesis players never even played PSO2. Heck, with how quickly PSO2 went by on the global servers, I wouldn't even blame anyone for never having unlocked Scion classes in the first place.
Okay, that's a bit of a stretch. You literally just had to get one class of 75 to unlock Scion classes. It wasn't that difficult. If you wanted to play one, you got it. It was, yeah, a year, that was plenty of time.
Basically, Scion classes, or advanced classes as they were originally called, are classes that don't have unique weapons, but rather use pre-existing weapons in different ways.
Hmm.
Scion classes do not use subclasses, but most of them can be used as a subclass themselves.
Three out
If
of four.
used as a subclass, you do not get their unique weapon behavior on subclass weapons. Now, there are a lot of restrictions here that wouldn't need to be carried over into New Genesis. For example, the subclass restrictions simply wouldn't need to exist, since subclasses don't provide huge damage multipliers anymore.
Wait, huh?
Now, that's all fine and dandy, but how different are these Scions exactly? Well, let's take a look at some of them.
Oh, hold on. That's kind of a toss-up, right? Because part of what was so powerful about Scion classes not needing subclasses was the fact that their main class kit was so incredibly powerful. They got so much damage out of just their class kit alone and their playstyle that they didn't need to have a subclass included with them as well. I think that if they were going to come back and they were going to be balanced in a similar way, they would still not use subclasses. I don't think they would need to have them. And not having a subclass would make very little difference because, as Kathy just said, they didn't really provide much damage. Or they don't really provide damage. At least not a lot of damage. Some subclasses do provide damage, others are utility, and so on and so forth. So I think, yeah, that would be perfectly fine based on how Scions were designed originally.
Shall we? Hero is easily my favorite one. It uses swords, typically a two-handed weapon on Hunter, like it's a one-handed weapon. Twin machine guns perform more like how you'd expect submachine guns to function, and Talus performed less like talisman and more like cards you'd chuck at the enemies.
Yeah,
Death by
more or
1,000 cuts. Each weapon had a photon art that allowed you to quickly swap between weapons on the fly, and you were even encouraged to do that, because the hero focus meter would build up slower if you stayed on one weapon for too long. Overall,
sort of. The hero focus meter increased slowly over time if you use the same PAs over and over again. You didn't have enough PAs to properly cycle boosting your hero gauge fast enough, so you needed to swap weapons. It was very important to do so. So it's based more on the PAs and less on the weapon itself. But yeah, more or less. It's nitpicky, but whatever.
it was a very simple but rewarding class to play, with
It
a very
was
tight-knit pool of abilities.
it was not simple.
Talus was a highly mobile weapon compared to the NGS.
Yo, editing Krono here. Just wanted to give a little bit of insight on my comment here, was saying it's not simple. It was a simple concept that was difficult to actually like completely do. Hero wanted to essentially never get hit, step through abilities, and cycle their PAs between weapons, all to basically keep their hero gauge or build their hero gauge up as fast as possible. And then when entering a state called hero time, maintain their hero gauge as they did more damage while in hero time, as long as possible until that eventually ended, and then you would use your hero time finisher. And that was like a loop that you needed to do. From the perspective of how to do that process, it was actually very simple. It was use different PAs, use different weapons, use different PAs, cycle all of your weapons, step through abilities and never get hit, press hero time, keep it as long as possible by continuing to do what you did beforehand, and then press hero time finish. Realistically speaking, to understand is not very difficult, but to actually do was pretty hard because even just taking damage in general would not only make you lose you had a bonus that you would get for not being hit, but you would lose that bonus, but you also wouldn't be doing what they anything they called heroic, is the way that Stratos describes it. And because you weren't doing anything heroic, which is getting hit, you're losing that hero time gauge much faster. So yeah, that's it. Okay, I'm going away now. Goodbye.
iteration, and even allowed you to teleport around the place. Phantom was another really fun Scion class.
In Talus's defense, Talus was a very highly mobile weapon compared to every other version of Talus, not just the NGS version.
It used rods like a scythe, which by itself is reason enough for it to come back, to be honest. Every time you used a technique, you would perform a little slice that recovered PP and incentivized melee gameplay.
Yep, those were really
Casting
nice.
techniques on Phantom was also very unique because Phantom cut the charge time significantly at the cost of potency. So, technique gameplay felt really fast and snappy. Something which I can't really say about Force right now. Phantom also had an alternative take on Katana. Rifle, on the other hand, was more of a laser gun with access to mines and beacons that dealt damage over time. All three weapons shared the unique gimmick where Photon Art's behavior changed depending on if you performed the PA as a follow-up to the weapon action or not. This essentially gave each weapon 8 Photon Arts, while only having 4 buttons on the weapon palette. Then
A big thing though was what was it? Was Katana. I mean, she glossed over it because there wasn't a lot to say, but Katana mostly was exactly as said. Its biggest issue was the fact that it just didn't generate enough PP to make it so you were able to consistently deal damage to actually like make it into a good weapon. Phantom was mostly Rod. You pretty much primarily only played Rod, and you primarily built yourself towards tech and, well, I know, what was it, like Dex built? I don't remember exactly how. I think it was just their specific mag. But Phantoms primarily played tech. You would play Rod for every situation unless Rod had to be locked out for some reason, since there were characters or there were enemies that had mechanics that would lock you out of certain attacks. Then you'd be forced into rifle would be your next best decision in most cases, if it was single target or AoE. In some single target cases where chase was very important, where you needed to stay on top of your enemy, Katana was really good in that aspect, since it had something called Quick Cut, which allowed you to teleport towards your target, something you guys probably know of now in NGS. A lot of teleportation abilities originated with Phantom's Quick Cut, where you were able to basically just zip right to the target itself. It was really, really cool. And that's what made Katana really good to use. But because of its issues with PP, really didn't have that staying power. Overall, players played primarily one weapon of each class. The ones who would push the most damage would either play Rod or they would play all the weapons. And then everyone else, they just played what they liked. I know people that loved playing Katana. I know people that loved playing Rifle, but realistically speaking, if you want to play Rifle, you're better off playing Ranger. And if you wanted to play Katana, you're better off playing Bouncer. Not Bouncer, I'm sorry, Braver. So overall, it was just the playstyle that worked out. But if you played everything together and played all of Phantom's kit, it was actually really, really enjoyable. And it was the definitive, in my opinion, best way to play a tech-based class. If Force was this, I think Force would be a lot more enjoyable.
laser gun with access to mines and beacons that dealt damage over time. All three weapons shared the unique gimmick where Photon Art's behavior changed depending on if you performed the PA as a follow-up to the weapon action or not. This essentially gave each weapon 8 Photon Arts, while only having 4 buttons on the weapon palette. Then we have Star.
That's a consistent thing, by the way. All the Scion classes had 4 PAs, not 8, or had 4 PAs, no more, no less.
Capable of French, so I'll just call it Star. Star was the first Scion class that had no technique access, and focused primarily on melee damage. It was overall really floaty and excelled in
physical
aerial
damage,
combat.
not necessarily melee,
Each
but
weapon was an alternative take on their pre-existing counterparts. Soaring blades were perhaps the coolest because the weapon action was this flurry of slashes followed up by a big f***off sword.
Bruh, let me tell you how I have an entire video showing how that ability is super cool, but a complete trap. Math, frame data, hyper nerd stuff. Loved it to death, but holy crap, full connect combo was a complete trap and I hate it. Essentially, the short version, that way you guys don't have to watch that video, was the amount of time it took to build and use it wasn't worth it. It was a 2-part ability where you had 2 pips of your gauge, and at one you would do connect, which would just be the swoop portion of this. Actually, I think
The coolest because
right there, that portion of it,
pre-existing counterparts. Soaring blades were
this right here
the coolest
was connect,
because the weapon action
and then this portion right here is full connect.
Slashes followed up by a big
So the full connect combo was connect into full connect, and the issue with it overall was the fact that you got a buff called high heat, which would make it so you would generate more of your gauge for the next full connect, right? You would generate more of it quicker. Problem was is that buff started at the start of your connect combo. It didn't start at the end of the full connect combo. So by the time you did a full connect, you only had 12 seconds of it as opposed to the 20 you were supposed to have. Granted, that was the exact amount I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, it was like about 16, 12 seconds roughly that you would have left over of the actual ability. Because then you would also be stuck lingering in this animation unless you were able to, unless you stepped out of it. You were kind of just stuck. And so because of that, and because of the way that ability worked out, you ended up not getting to your next full connect within that 12-second time frame. And because of that, you ended up losing damage overall. It took you longer to build that next full connect. So it got to the point where it was actually better in a lot of cases to just use connect. And because you could connect and keep going and dealing more damage over and over and keep keeping your high heat buff up and using more and more connects, you would end up getting enough connects for it would do more damage than the full connect combo itself, which absolutely sucked because the big F off sword is awesome and you should be wanting to use it every single time you can. Also, when you missed it, you wanted to just basically cry and walk away. Can you guys tell I played Etoile as my primary class, my main class back then? Yep, I did. A lot of it. It was fun. I cried a lot too. But yeah, no, it was just, it sucked, and I really wish it was different, but it was a lot of fun to play. It looked cool too.
The weapons this time around were more independent, without an overarching gimmick that bound them together.
Yeah, they were. You didn't have to play any specific, like, they didn't really work with one another. Hero, you wanted to use all three. Phantom, they were pretty separate as well. You didn't need to use any specific weapon. It was just more of if one weapon got locked out, the other one, or you'd use the next one. Since as a Rod Phantom, you could literally deal with every situation, single target and AoE, so it wasn't a problem. Unless they just locked you out of using your Rod, you can just use your Rod even in melee combat. So I would say that Phantom did that first, but yeah, more or less, this one like was completely disconnected. None of their mechanics swapped over between the two, or between the three.
Wand, for example, could modify their PA with the weapon action button. A
Wand was probably the biggest offender of being a broken weapon in a class. You could play Wand and play nearly no other weapon. As long as your weapon wasn't locked out, you didn't need to play anything else. It was the best AoE, it was the best single target, it was the best damage that was available to it overall. Even in highly aggressive situations. The best case scenario for Soaring Blades was a fight called Solo Sodom, and Wand was still faster at it. Felt pretty bad as an Etoile main, I'll be honest with you. Unless you liked Wand. If you liked Wand, you were in a good spot. So, you know, magical girls for the win, I guess.
Wand PA by default was geared towards AoE situations, but if you pressed weapon action in the right moment, then the PA would become single target orientated instead.
And it still did more damage than everything else.
Also tried to combat the broken healing meta with the damage balancer skill. This skill reduced incoming damage by 70%, but came with the caveat that you can only use items to heal yourself.
Which broke the meta anyway, because it made every class that wanted to just stand still and not have to worry about mechanics more powerful. It broke Ranger because Ranger now could stand in one spot, get great multipliers on their damage, as well as get great multipliers on their damage reduction, and be able to heal fairly easily. It broke Hunter because Hunter combated its one biggest flaw, which was that you couldn't heal off of PAs or anything or off of off of affixes. You couldn't heal off of techs. You could only heal off of healing items, and Hunter was the one class in the entire game that had the auto use healing item. So you took the tankiest class in the entire game and made it even tankier. So, well, you'd argue that it was Summoner, but regardless, I digress. There was a lot going on here. So the broken healing meta was they just brought the broken damage reduction meta along with it as well. So you had the broken deal with incoming damage meta, and damage started to get pretty dumb really, really fast.
Lifesteal abilities or techniques simply would be unable to heal you.
It healed you for one.
A very unique subclass. On classes like Hunter, damage balancer wasn't even that big of a trade-off.
It wasn't a trade-off at all.
Hunters had the skill automate half-line, which automatically healed them using a healing item if they ever fell below 50% health. And then there is Luster, but I don't think I need to mention it too much, because Slayer is basically a watered-down version of Luster already. Both Luster and Slayer have this move stay arts gimmick that basically allows them to change PA behavior depending if you move or don't move.
Yep.
Allowing Gunblades to have 8 photon arts, while only occupying 4 spaces on the weapon palette. Where have I heard that before? And
I wonder.
Was even crazier in that regard because even the jump button was used as a follow-up attack, and holding down the attack button extended them. Luster also had 3 different playstyles that differed based on your weapon element. Since weapon elements aren't a core element of all NGS weapons anymore, it's easy to see why this feature wasn't brought over to Slayer. Also, I personally preferred the Luster voltage system over Slayer's, because it applied to all weapons, not just gunblades.
It broke weapons, not just gunblades. The voltage system is what made me hate Bouncer Luster, because you could quite literally reset your reset a state. That was super, super powerful on Bouncer. Essentially, if you played Bouncer Luster, you build up voltage to 500, and then you use Photon Blade Fever. You would hold down your a specific tech on your palette and spam weapon action, and you essentially just shoot blades at your target, This was tech canceling, is what it was called back then. But you would essentially shoot blades, and you would use essentially your weapon action over and over again and float around. So you were about 80% invulnerable most of the time, as long as you were playing it properly. You essentially had insane amounts of vulnerability in iframes. You were dealing insane amounts of damage because this was the highest amount of damage you could deal during this specific state. And because of what Luster, or what Luster's voltage mechanic did, which was it reduced or reduced cooldowns by up to 1 minute. If you had 500 voltage, you use this, it reduced your cooldown up to a minute. When it finished, your cooldown was already reduced low enough for you to get it back again, and you go right back into it again. I think it was reduced it by half, maybe. Maybe reduce it by half. It was a situation where you had 500 voltage. You essentially could get your cooldown so low that you had no cooldown on Fanatic or Photon Blade Fever, and you could just reduce or reuse this in the same state over and over and over again. So Bouncer Luster became get 500 voltage, hold down attack, and spam weapon action forever. That was it. Then you pressed Photon Blade Fever again when it came off cooldown, or when it ended because it was already off cooldown. Yeah, it was really boring for me personally because I like to do a lot of solo fights, and doing that for 20 minutes straight was not fun
But this class
or
also
interactive.
proves that you don't have to, or should, bring over Scions 1-to-1 to NGS.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess while it's not a Scion, it's worth mentioning that we technically don't have Summoner in NGS. Waker
No.
is a very functional and deadly class, but the familiars are just attack animations. They're not a living entity fighting by your side on their own. Some people miss that, and while
Argue that it's not they fought by your side. The summoner summons fought for them. The summoner didn't do any fighting. The summoner just told the summon pet to do all the fighting for them. So what's changed now is the pet doesn't do any fighting. You do the fighting, and the pet is kind of like the animation alongside of you. That's kind of the closest they have been to it, because there's no specific PAs you do versus what the pet does. If a summoner did a PA or a tech that was different, it was like a support tech or something like that that they would use, whether it be to heal themselves or to buff themselves or whatever it happens to be. That was it. The pet did everything.
I personally don't think it would be wise to bring it back as a regular class, maybe a more fun-orientated approach might work. End Summoner as a casino minigame class. Viola horse race betting? Melon
I mean,
basketball?
I'm with it.
I'm just joking.
I'm with it.
But I
No,
think a
it's worth.
pet-based class would be best suited for a more casual game mode that is detached from the main game, which would be a very similar approach to how Blue Mage was treated in Final Fantasy XIV.
Not a good example. A lot of people dislike what they've done with Blue Mage in 14. Unfortunately, with Blue Mage in 14, it just did not. It was completely detached, like hard detached from content. And because they didn't update what Blue Mage was capable of doing, you really didn't even get much Blue Mage content in the first place. When it first released, it was okay, right? Like it was all right to an extent, but how can I put this? And I know there are other people out there that might share the same sentiment, but like because of what Blue Mage was in 14, it kind of ruined like their enjoyment of that class. They didn't really get to enjoy Blue Mage. Like I feel like there would be more people upset about the fact that Summoner is regulated to that specific aspect of the game, and if it doesn't get updated enough, there are people that are doing it like very, very what's the word I'm looking for here? They're just upset, right? Like if it doesn't get enough content, then people are going to be upset about it because that might be what their favorite thing is. So it's very, very careful about like isolating it down to that, because yeah, Blue Mage is not in a really good spot and hasn't been for a long time, unfortunately.
In order to not compromise its core identity of learning spells from monsters, it was made a limited job with its own unique content, and the abilities it learns are very OP and fun to steamroll content with.
In the content you can use it in, absolutely yes, but unfortunately you can't use it in a lot of content. And I know there are plenty of people that would have argued that they would have much rather had their identity or their core like identity be baked into like their class quests. That way they'd be able to actually use the class in other content and just make it into a regular job.
Pet AI in PSO2 was simply very unreliable, and once you got to endgame activities it would often cause a lot of grief, which wouldn't be as big of an issue in its own side content. Anyway,
Hey, wait.
backlog
Wait, what?
grief PSO2 are very OP and fun to steamroll content with. Pet AI in PSO2 was simply very unreliable, and once you got to endgame activities it would often cause a lot of grief, which wouldn't be as big of an issue in its own side content.
I mean, yeah, but was Pet AI really a problem in PSO2? I mean, there were some irritations I know I had summoner friends of mine talk with me about, but like I don't think Pet AI was the conversation that they had. But I don't know. I'm not a summoner.
Back to Scions. I used to be against Scions coming back to New Genesis, because I was concerned that they might be broken again compared to regular classes.
Yeah, that is an
But
issue.
then Slayer came out, and I realized that the only broken part about Scions was their ease of play. They don't have to level their PA, or level a subclass, or craft their PA/techniques.
Yeah,
Their
that was a
skill
big
trees
part.
don't have any bad skills like Poison Ignition either. The max damage potential was already sort of the same between all classes, regular classes just took more effort to get there. On top of that, Slayer proved that
Not
you can
completely.
adapt the most broken Scion from PSO2, and make it way less insane in New Genesis. So why
True.
should we stop there? Hero probably wouldn't require many changes. The teleportation gimmick might need a change, and the travel photon arts would obviously need to be restricted to work purely like a gap closer, but overall
Yeah,
it could be moved
agreed.
without much difficulties. The weapon swap PA gimmick might not be needed anymore either, thanks to the multi-weapon system.
Also
The
true,
only
yeah.
issue here being that you'd need a 3-way multi-weapon system, which Hunter players have been asking for a while now. Phantom, on the other hand, would be a little bit more difficult, simply because of the way techniques are balanced in NGS. In PSO2, the charging of techniques was the long part, meanwhile the casting animation was the short part. In New Genesis, that is flipped on its head, so techniques take very little time to charge, but the casting animation is way longer.
Yeah.
Technique gameplay on Phantom would likely need a different take in general, since it'd be boring to have it rely on the same elemental gimmicks as Force, Tector, and Bouncer. I would rather Phantom skip out on these gimmicks and focus entirely on the Phantom Marker skill.
I
It'd
mean,
be a tough balancing act.
you
but from
could
all
take
I've
the
seen
Phantom
about
Marker skill and
NGS,
just
the
slap
devs
it in
are
there and
doing
it'd
a
be
way better
mostly
job at
okay.
balancing things than they ever did in PSO2.
Yeah, by far.
Star would likely lose the damage balancer ability since NGS saw a massive healing overhaul, and we don't have lifesteal mechanics as of yet. Other than that, it could probably be copied over without much issue. Just gotta replace the travel PA as with the other two. It might also be a good opportunity for the devs to overhaul Bouncer Soaring Blades, since they've felt like a weird mix of Bouncer and Star's DNA that feels at odds with each other.
Thank you. Someone else sees it. But streamer, Bouncer's not bad. Soaring Blades do a lot of damage. That's not the problem. Please, for the love of God, overhaul that weapon. Holy crap, yes. Bouncer currently actually feels the closest, like Soaring Blades Bouncer feels the closest to Etwall without being Etwall. It's like right there on the cusp of being so good, but like it feels like it's being ripped because of what what Bouncer was, right? Like Fanatic Blade has to be there, and this whole mechanic, it's dumb. Please, for the love of God. I have never once been like, I feel like me and Kathy 100% align on everything. Most of the time we agree, and that's totally fine. There are times that we disagree pretty heavily, but like this right here, best take in this entire video.
But let's say we do get Science back, now we have an issue in terms of how these classes interact as subclasses. And for this we might need a class-specific subclass restriction system. So for example, Hero would be unable to be used as a subclass on Hunter, Gunner, Force, and Tector. Alternatively, you could give Scion classes new weapon categories instead of sharing weapon categories with regular classes. This, however, has the unfortunate side effect that loot will suffer from category bloat, and getting the weapon type you want will become much more difficult.
It's not that hard to get now, though.
Likely not be an elegant solution to this issue. I know a lot of people want the devs to take a break from making new classes, and focus on balancing the ones we currently have. And I agree, they should slow down a little. But I also think they're doing a much better job at balancing classes than they ever did, so I don't think this argument should be used against bringing Scions over to New Genesis.
By far.
I'm clearly jaded in that regard though. I think the devs should definitely consider bringing Scions over, because like I said at the beginning, if I stuck to playing Hero in PSO2 I would feel very alien trying to play NGS. I know a friend of mine feels that way regarding the lack of Phantom. A different friend of mine felt that way with the absence of Luster, which got fixed with the release of Slayer. They used to be very apathetic about playing the game, simply because no class felt as quick and snappy to play as Luster, but when Slayer came out, they finally enjoyed the game to its fullest. So, there are definitely some people who are not being served with the lack of Scion classes. While regular classes in NGS share some Scion DNA, for example, Overemphasis is basically just Overdrive. None of these classes scratch the same itch. Wand is an iteration on Tector's Wand from PSO2, not Star's Wand. Also, I think being able to swap between two classes without having to invest into new gear would help alleviate the monotony many players are feeling with the current 4PA weapon setup. Sword Hunter players could freely swap into Hero Sword, Force players could freely swap into Phantom, and so on. There are a lot of things to consider, and I personally think bringing Scions back would only be beneficial for the game. But what's your opinion on the matter? I know this is a topic that can be very divisive among players, since Scions were generally seen as rather broken compared to regular classes in PSO2. I by no means want Scion classes to be broken when brought over into New Genesis, I just want their gameplay to return while being properly balanced around all other classes. Huge shout out to all my wonderful channel members supporting this channel. And an even bigger shout out to the Drew Blue for creating these high-res NGS mockup icons of Scion classes.
Those look really, really
I
good.
hope everyone has a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care!
Okay, so really, really well done, actually. There's a lot of this that I'm like, you know what, honestly, even though there was a lot of things mentioned in there that I could give a different take on overall when it comes to classes, um, overall, she's right. Like, Kathy is 100% on point with all of this. A thing that I'm kind of like, honestly, not a huge deal is the subclass portion of this, right? The subclass issues. Honestly, when it comes to the subclass system, I have a different take on this, right? And maybe I'm crazy about this, but if you guys remember, if you've ever played Black Desert, they have a system that increases that basically shows up after level 56, where the classes have a different way of playing, like essentially almost like an evolution of the class, where they have like a different weapon type in some cases, or just an overall different way of playing with the weapon that you currently have. Essentially, what ends up happening is it's like an awakening state at level 56, and it allows you to play that awakening state, or you have the ability to opt to play the original state of your class. I think NGS would actually benefit from this. Now, with the Slayer specifically, there was no weapon, like there was no class that embodied that weapon beforehand, which is why it made the most sense to me personally to do that. But with the other classes, with Hero, with Etwal, with with Phantom, those classes all use weapons that are currently used by another class. I think it would be kind of cool to see a similar situation pop up where there's an evolution of classes. We have an evolution of, well, Ultra Evolution update, right? Haha, very funny. But we have an evolution of the bad guys we're facing. Why shouldn't arcs evolve to meet that threat? How cool would it be if hunters became heroes? If bound or rangers or rangers, move towards that whole phantom situation along with like forces, like it just little things like that. I'm just spitballing random ideas in general, and this would be a much larger undertaking in my opinion, but it'd be really cool to see something like that exist. Evolution of classes as opposed to just adding more classes or replacing classes, because a problem that tends to happen when you have classes that use similar weapons, even with different playing styles, is they almost eclipse the need for the previous class. I feel like if Hero existed, you'd almost see no one playing Hunter. If Phantom existed, you probably would almost see no one playing Force. And it's not that that's a bad thing overall, in my opinion. It's just, it's very easy for it to like one to overtake the other. And that I feel like is an issue that most devs are concerned with, because then like what happens to the people that like the playstyle for the original class? Do you force them into this new class because it's stronger, it's better? Do you continue to upgrade the original class for only a couple of people? Like where do you stand in that situation? And that's a much more convoluted way of dealing with this than what Kathy proposed. But what I do think would work out is just make them not interact with the subclass system. As crazy as it sounds, we don't need them as subclasses, and they don't need to have other classes as subclasses. They could just be Scion classes, and the Scion classes could just be the class by itself. And it would be fine. It would not really mess with anything, because realistically speaking, the subclass system does not really mess with how the game works at the moment. You would just have to make it so the points that they input in their skill tree would match up from battle power perspective, right? Because we all know points put into your skill tree increases your BP. You would have to have that match, right? I think it'd be fine, realistically speaking. I don't think anything would matter. It wouldn't hurt anyone, because the subclass system isn't that big of a deal. It's to the point where like right now we can't remove the subclass system because of how baked it is in with certain classes and weapon styles and combinations. But with new classes coming out, they don't need to have subclasses. Subclasses specifically aren't so impactful that they have to exist, in my opinion. So we could literally, like, everything else that Kathy mentioned, like all the other things would work out fine. And you could just skip over the subclass situation and it would be perfectly okay. I think that'd be all right. But yeah, great video. I know I definitely made this video way longer than it needs to be, but there was a lot I wanted to say about it. So figured I'd have a little chat with you guys. If you wanted to just watch the video uncut, of course, like I mentioned at the very beginning, I'll leave a link in the video description over to Kathy's channel. They'll also be in the title, so go ahead and toss them a sub. They're right there. I want to see that number hit over 1K, honestly. And I've got plenty of people that watch these videos, so if some of you guys, 20 of you guys, popped over and subscribed to that channel, that would be a huge favor to me. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Let me know what you guys think could be done in the comments below. Like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to keep up with more, and I'll see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace out.